Don't bring her to the funeral. That's what the text said. I read it twice. Then a third time. My thumb was still hovering over the screen when I looked up and saw Aunt Diane standing across the room, adjusting a vase of white lilies like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest. She didn't know the message had landed in my hands. She didn't know I was standing right there, reading every word she'd written about me to our entire family. She smiled at me. Warm, easy, like we were fine. I smiled back. And in that moment, neither of us knew how badly this was about to go for her. My name is Celeste. I'm 34 years old, and I need to tell you what happened next. I work as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm downtown. I know how documents work. I know what signatures mean. I know the difference between what people say out loud and what they put in writing, and I've learned that the writing always tells the truth. That skill didn't come from a classroom. It came from years of being overlooked, of having to read rooms carefully because no one was going to warn me when something was wrong. I grew up on the edges of this family. My mother married into it late, and they never really accepted her. She was too quiet, too different, too much of an outsider for their taste. She died when I was 19, and when she left, whatever fragile thread had connected me to these people frayed almost completely. Almost. Because there was still Grandma Ruth. She was the one who called just to check in. She kept my birthday on the calendar every single year. She was the one who once pulled me close and whispered, "You're more than they think, baby. Don't you forget it." I held on to that. I had to. She was all I had in that family. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't even on their radar most days. But Grandma Ruth saw something in me. And apparently so did her lawyer. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in a family that was supposed to be yours, hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I'm reading every single one. You are not invisible here. Let's go. Grandma Ruth passed on a Tuesday. Quietly in her sleep, the way she always said she wanted to go. I got the call at 6 in the morning, and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time before I could move. She was 81. She had lived a full life. I knew that. But knowing something and feeling it are two completely different things, and what I felt that morning was a grief so heavy it had its own weight. I drove to her house that afternoon to help with arrangements. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to do something with my hands so I didn't have to sit alone with all that quiet. That's where I was when the text came through. Helping with the flowers. Trying to be present. 3 days before the funeral, Aunt Diane called a family meeting at her house. I found out about it the way I found out about most things in that family. Too late, by accident, through someone who felt guilty enough to tip me off. My cousin Yvette sent me a photo of the meeting agenda. It listed decisions about the eulogy, the burial music, who would speak, the order of the processional, and at the bottom, 2 words that made my stomach drop. Estate transition. They were dividing everything, and they hadn't told me there was even a meeting. I went anyway. I drove to Diane's house, walked up the front steps, and knocked on the door. She opened it and stood in the frame like a wall. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold in about half a second. "This is a family meeting, Celeste," she said. "You know what I mean by that." From somewhere behind her, I heard Derek laugh. Someone else muttered something I couldn't make out fully, but I caught the word again, and I knew the sentence it belonged to. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push past her. I just looked at her and said, "Grandma Ruth called me last week. Did she call any of you?" The silence behind that door was immediate, complete, because we both knew the answer. None of them had spoken to Ruth in months. They'd been too busy planning what to do with everything she'd leave behind to actually spend time with her while she was still here. Diane's jaw tightened. She stepped back and closed the door in my face. I walked back to my car in the cold and sat there for a moment. Then I drove home. The funeral program was printed without my name. I found out when I picked one up off the table at the service. There was a full list of surviving family members, a group photo from a reunion I hadn't been invited to, and not a single mention of me. Not as a granddaughter, not as anything. When I asked Diane about it quietly, after the service, she barely looked at me. "We kept it to immediate family," she said. "You understand." I nodded like I didn't. At the reception, I was standing in the hallway near the kitchen when I heard Diane's voice carry across the room. She was talking to one of Ruth's old friends, a woman named Gloria who had known the family for decades. Diane's voice was the kind of loud that pretends not to be on purpose. "Celeste isn't really part of the estate situation," she said. "She was never truly family. Ruth was kind to her, of course, But it was out of pity, really. You know how Ruth was. The room smelled like casserole and old flowers, and something faintly like Grandma Ruth's perfume, and I stood in that hallway and let every word land. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just listened, and I filed it away. The third thing happened 2 days later. Derek came to find me. He sat across from me at a coffee shop like we were having a normal conversation, then slid a folded document across the table. It's straightforward, he said. You sign this, acknowledge you're not part of the estate, and we give you $500 as a goodwill gesture. No drama, no lawyers, clean. I picked up the paper. I read every line. I read the language carefully, the way I'd been trained to, and I understood exactly what they thought they were doing. They thought I needed the money. They thought I was desperate enough to sign away any claim I might have for $500 and the promise of no conflict. I set the paper back down on the table. I didn't say a word, I just left. In my car, I remember thinking, they think I'm the weak one. They think I'm scrambling. They have never been more wrong about anything in their lives. What they didn't know was that for the past 2 years, I had been the one helping Grandma Ruth get her affairs in order. She didn't trust the family to do it honestly, and she didn't know how to navigate the paperwork herself. So she called me. Every few months, I'd come over, we'd sit at her kitchen table, and I'd help her organize her documents, review her instructions, make sure everything was the way she wanted it. She trusted me with things she didn't trust anyone else with, and during that time, something else was happening that I only learned about gradually. Aunt Diane had been calling Ruth, pressuring her, suggesting she reconsider her decisions, implying that Celeste wasn't really family, wasn't really deserving, wasn't someone Ruth needed to include. Ruth never told me directly. She just listened to those calls, and then quietly, steadily, she pressed record. She gave me the recordings for safekeeping, told me to keep them somewhere safe and not tell anyone I had them. I stored them in a labeled folder on an encrypted drive, organized, time-stamped, every conversation documented. I also had something else. I had witnessed the signing of Ruth's updated will at my firm, 14 months before she died. I knew what it said. And I knew the family had no idea it existed. I didn't need to fight loud. I just needed the right room and the right moment. The call came on a Wednesday evening. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and professional. He introduced himself as Mr. Harlan, Grandma Ruth's personal attorney. He had handled her legal affairs for 22 years. The family had always assumed he was on their side, or at least neutral. They'd never paid close enough attention to know better. Your grandmother updated her will 14 months ago, he said. I've been instructed to contact you directly before I contact anyone else. He told me something else too. Aunt Diane had visited his office twice in the past year. She'd come alone both times, without the family's knowledge, trying to get a sense of Ruth's decisions, and Harlan implied carefully, to see if any of those decisions could be influenced. Ruth had noted both visits in writing and left that documentation with Harlan. While I was absorbing all of that, the family was celebrating quietly. Diane posted on social media about honoring Ruth's legacy. She made comments at church about finally getting things settled. She moved through those days with the easy confidence of someone who was certain the outcome was already decided. Harlan scheduled the will reading for the following Thursday. Before he hung up, he said one more thing. Don't tell anyone I called you first. I didn't. The Thursday morning of the reading, I woke up early. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I was very still for a long time. I wasn't nervous. That surprised me a little. I had expected to feel anxious or unsettled, but what I actually felt was something closer to calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've been patient for a very long time and the waiting is finally over. Harlan's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown. The conference room had large windows that let in flat winter light, and the table was long and dark and smelled faintly of wood polish. The family arrived before me. When I walked in, they were already seated, some of them dressed like they were going to a celebration, murmuring to each other with the low energy of people who believed the result was already in. Diane was at the head of the table. She looked at me when I came in and leaned toward Derek and said something I wasn't meant to hear but did. I don't know why she bothered coming. I took a seat quietly near the end of the table. I folded my hands. I waited. Harlan came in, set his folders down, and opened the meeting without ceremony. He thanked everyone for coming. He explained the process. And then he began. The first name he read aloud for primary beneficiary designation was mine. Celeste. The room didn't react immediately. It took a second for the word to land, for the meaning to register. And then the sound that filled that conference room was something I won't forget. It started with Diane. "That's impossible," she said. Her voice was tight and strange. "That's not right." She manipulated her. She was always whispering in Ruth's ear, always making herself seem more important than she was. Harlan didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply opened a second folder, removed a small device, and pressed play. Grandma Ruth's voice filled the room. She sounded exactly like herself. Steady, clear, a little dry in the way she got when she was being deliberate about something. She described, in plain language, the calls she had received from family members asking her to reconsider her decisions regarding Celeste. She described the pressure. She described how it made her feel. And then she said, in her own words, that the attempts to change her mind had only made her more certain she was doing the right thing. No one spoke while the recording played. When it ended, the silence in that room was so complete I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Diane stood up. Her chair scraped back loud against the floor. She started to say something about contesting the will, about lawyers, about what she was going to do next. Harlan let her finish. Then he informed her, in the same measured tone he'd used for everything else, that any legal challenge to the will would require her to address, in formal proceedings, the document that had been presented to me at a coffee shop 2 weeks earlier. The document Derek had drafted and slid across a table without an attorney present. The one that constituted an unauthorized attempt to interfere with estate proceedings. Derek went very still. Diane sat back down. I looked at my aunt then. I looked at her directly for what felt like the first time in years. And I said quietly, Grandma Ruth knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. In the weeks that followed, I inherited Grandma Ruth's house and a sum of money that was modest by some people's standards and life-changing by mine. I didn't call the family. I didn't send a message or reach out or try to explain anything. There was nothing left to explain. I went through Ruth's belongings slowly, carefully, over a series of quiet weekends. One afternoon, I found a small velvet pouch in the back of her jewelry box. Inside was a brooch she had worn to church for as long as I could remember, a simple gold piece with a tiny pearl at the center. I held it for a long time. Then I wrapped it carefully and donated it anonymously to the church she had attended for 40 years. I didn't leave a card. I didn't need the credit. That was Ruth's way of doing things, and it felt right to honor her in her own language. The family's attempt to challenge the will dissolved quietly about 3 weeks later. Their attorney apparently reviewed the recordings and advised them not to proceed. I heard this through Yvette, who still checked in occasionally. I thanked her and didn't ask for more details. I spent a long time in that family trying to prove I belonged there, trying to take up less space so they'd be more comfortable, trying to be useful enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough that maybe one day they'd stop treating me like an inconvenience. What I know now is that the one person who ever truly saw me didn't need me to prove anything. She just made sure, in the most permanent way she could, that I would be okay long after she was gone. If your family ever tried to erase you, from photos, from conversations, from tables you had every right to sit at, I need you to hear this. Being left out doesn't mean you were worth less. It means they felt threatened by what you represented. Subscribe and share your story in the comments below. Have you ever been cut out of something that should have included you? Tell me about it. Click hype to help this story reach every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Standing up for yourself is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.